Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Red Bull are officially back, and I don't just mean on track, but in the antics they are up to this last weekend in Austin. Fined €50,000 for tampering with the piece of tape that Lando puts on the side of the track to show him where he's going to pull up for the start of the race in his grid box. These are 2021 level shenanigans that Red Bull are pulling here as they try and pull out all the stops to help Max Verstappen win this title. What next in this Tapegate warfare? Will McLaren look to fire back in some way? What other ideas do Red Bull have to put off one of the championship rivals? Very much enjoy your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. And it is race week yet again. The Mexican Grand Prix comes up this weekend. Of course, a great track historically for Max and for Red Bull, but Ferrari had a 1-2 around there last year, as we shall get to in a second. Now, speaking of Carlos Sainz, who won the Mexican Grand Prix last season, he has a penalty for the Mexican Grand Prix this year for this incident. This was the side-by-side. He made a move on Behrman, a perfectly fair and good move, but when he went for the move on Antonelli, he was significantly further back. It was extremely optimistic. Antonelli elected to turn into the corner, which was within his right to do, and the stewards have given car 55 a 5-place penalty because, of course, it ruined his race and Antonelli's, but Antonelli was able to stay in the Grand Prix. Car 55 locked brakes when it became clear that the collision was unavoidable. He suggested the driver of car 12 ought to have anticipated an overtake attempt and left space to avoid contact. However, at no point prior to the apex was the front axle of car 55 alongside or ahead of the mirror of car 12, which is what I mentioned yesterday. Therefore, according to the driving standards guidelines, car 55 had not earned the right to be left space at the apex. The stewards therefore determined that he was predominantly to blame for the collision, and the penalty is applied accordingly. 10-second time penalty it would have been. That means a 5-place for the next Grand Prix. I think that's fair. Intrigue your thoughts in the comments. But speaking of Carlos Sainz, remarkably enough, despite that he DNF'd this Grand Prix, he scored as many points in the last 3 Grand Prix as Piastri has, and that's the championship leader. So, of course, massively helped by the great result that he had in Baku, but nonetheless, those are surprising numbers, it's got to be said, especially with the way the season began. There was also a bit of drama at Alpine. So Colapinto went for this overtake at the end of the Grand Prix, and it was clean, it was pretty marginal, to be fair. Colapinto sent it down the inside of turn 1. He kept himself on the track. Gasly was, I think, very, very marginally outside of the track limit. So it was fair racing, but it was pretty hard racing from Colapinto. But of course, this was against his own teammate, well outside of the points. So there's been quite a lot of controversy about this because Colapinto was told, both cars are managing, let's hold the positions. And Colapinto said, what? This guy is so slow, I'm going for it anyway. He then goes for the overtake and makes the move happen. Nothing was gained, nothing was lost. The question is, what should the team think about it, right? Because they told him to hold, and Alpine aren't happy. They commented after and said, any instruction made by the pit wall is final. So they're not happy that he ignored the team orders. Didn't affect anything. You might argue, well, Colapinto's fighting for his career, so he's got to show a little bit of grit, a little bit of determination. And I do get that, I respect it. But also, who's he trying to impress, right? Like, his only seat for next year is at Alpine. So, you've got to make sure you impress the people who are actually going to hire you, right? It's not like he is, let's say, showing off for other teams who are going to sign him. No one else is going to sign him. It's either Alpine extend him or he leaves Formula 1. That is how it currently seems. So you don't want to bite the hand that feeds you in that sense. Should the team have not given him the order anyway? They could have just said, well, you might as well race. I think the team, I understand why they gave their order, but I think that arguably they should have just said, you know what, keep it clean, guys, if you want to race. But also maybe Colapinto, having heard the instruction, maybe should have just listened to them because there was not much to gain anyway. As ever, pretty interesting debate. There was also a drama between Tsunoda and Behrman, right? So Behrman went for that optimistic move where Sainz eventually crashed into Antonelli. Tsunoda moved to the inside. He was quite aggressive in his defence, but I do think that having watched it back, Behrman was extremely ambitious in his overtaking attempts there. And, Behrman drove himself on the road, off the road, when it was clear that that gap was closing. So I don't think that this was Tsunoda's fault. I think that it was kind of racing, but Behrman, he was the one taking the risk in that overtake attempt. So I don't really think that Yuki did much wrong there. Although Behrman wasn't very happy with Yuki. Look, Behrman's done a great job this year. He also roasted Yuki after the race and said that, well, Yuki keeps trying, but it's not working. So I'm sure that that guy in the comments who loves talking about Yuki Suzuki or whatever he says was lapping all this up. But we know that a decision will be made over the upcoming rounds. Helmut Marko's even said that after Mexico, there will be a decision to be made. And I think probably we know what decision that is going to end up being. A couple of things on Ferrari, because out of nowhere, they actually put it together for the main race, and they didn't get disqualified. I was half expecting to wake up this morning and see Leclerc has been disqualified for the US Grand Prix for plank wear, right? But that didn't happen, and they have maintained their positions, as we've seen both Hamilton and Leclerc got disqualified by separate teams, separate incidences a couple of years ago. But Hamilton says, look, I'm happy with the car. I'm feeling pretty good with it now. Definitely much better than he was several rounds ago. It feels like Hamilton's made good progress with the SF25, but the car still has many fundamental flaws. He was lifting and coasting the whole race. The strategy they put him on in the end probably wasn't the preferable one compared to what Leclerc was able to do. He also had a strange issue at the end of the race. He thought it was a puncture. It actually wasn't, but there was clearly something going on there. Anyway, Hamilton passed 5,000 points, the first driver to do that yesterday. Unfortunately, does begin, however, an unwanted record of 19 Grand Prix without a podium. Of course, he won the sprint in China, but maybe there's a chance for Ferrari between now until the end of the season to do so again, because it looked like they were totally dead and buried. But again, third, fourth in Austin. Maybe Mexico can throw out some similar surprises as well, who knows. But I will say, in addition to the driver standings looking rather tasty, not like anyone really cares, given the driver standings are so juicy, but the constructors are like very interesting for second place, right? Because Mercedes at 341, it kind of felt like they were away and gone, with maybe Max able to catch them. But Ferrari are at 334, and after a better weekend, they're now right back in the hunt, right? So, look, I don't know who's going to finish second in the constructors. I don't massively care, but it is pretty impressive that you've got 3 teams within 10 points with 5 rounds to go in the championship and 2 sprints worth keeping in mind as well. But speaking of that, who is the current championship favourite, and why are Red Bull doing everything it takes to stop Lando Norris? And we'll get to that in a second. Now, Piastri, as he says, he's still happier here than if he was second or third, right? He's got a 14-point lead over Lando. Let me just bring this back up. And a 40 points lead over Max Verstappen. 346 plays 332, plays 306. And Piastri, yeah, as I said yesterday, was particularly anonymous this weekend, but he's still got an advantage. And I actually had a look at some of the bookmakers today and what they have to say about this. Some bookies, actually quite a few, have Piastri, Norris and Verstappen basically equal in their probability to win this year's World Championship, which is incredibly remarkable, right? We've got 5 rounds to go, and I think you can argue any of these 3 drivers is the favourite. Piastri has a chunky lead. Lando isn't far behind and has form on his side compared to Piastri, and then Max, you can say what I just said, times it by 3, and you get with Max, right? His form is in absolute stratospheric levels, but he's a bit further behind. So you can genuinely argue it anyway as to who's the title favourite. Quite a lot of the bookies have Lando as the 3rd favourite here. I actually think that you can very much argue that Lando is really well positioned. And actually, Jenson Button, asked for his prediction, says that he thinks Lando's going to win because 14 points behind Piastri. He's going to gain that on him on, let's say, recent evidence. And look, if it wasn't for what happened in Zandvoort, Lando would be leading this championship, right? Despite all the other things that have happened so far this season. Of course, the DNF, if he had those 18 points back, that would be first place in the championship right now for Lando. And yeah, Max is coming quickly, but he's still a fair bit behind, right? I mean, he's got to gain 8 points a weekend on Piastri to do so he can't just finish first with Piastri second every time and make it work, but that's probably not going to be happening anyway. For Lando, he can't afford to finish second because Max will overhaul him, but another win or something for Lando in there with some consistent placings, he's absolutely got what it takes. I think that for Lando as well, if he was in the championship leads, I think the pressure would be getting to him, but it seems to be Piastri's the one feeling the pressure from being the favourite. And Lando, in many people's eyes, is kind of third favourite here, but I don't think it's worth overlooking him at all, because he does have the experience now, and he's impressed me over the last couple of Grand Prix. So Button says, Lando's looking the strongest. Lando is the favourite, as far as Button is concerned, but I think it's extremely difficult to say who the actual favourite is. And Red Bull are going to do everything to mean that whoever you think the favourite is, Max is going to take this championship, and this is one of the games that they have been playing over the last couple of Grand Prix weekends. So this is so hilarious to me and proves that Horner, McKees, whatever, it's still Red Bull. You know, they've changed a lot, but this is still the Red Bull that we remember. So they were fined €50,000 by the FIA. Now, the reason for this is not precisely what people are talking about. It's how they went about doing that. So there's a little bit of nuance here. But they were fined €50,000, which is quite a lot, right? Like, this is quite a lot because they unequivocally broke a rule by doing this. But the drama is actually not a rule breach, it's more from a sportsmanship angle. But they were fined because a member of their team re-entered the gate well area at gate 1 in proximity of the second grid position, which belongs to Lando Norris, after the cars had pulled away for the formation lap. So this is very much, it's not even a faux pas, this is just against the rules. If someone climbs through those gaps in the fence while the cars are out for their formation lap after everyone's meant to clear the grids, you know, that is very clearly against the rules. The fine was issued because hindering the safety measures to prepare the track for the race after the grid has been cleared is absolutely prohibited. So that's why they were fined. But the explanation didn't describe, well, why did he try and go to the track? Why was he accessing the gate well area on Lando's grid position, right? Why would you possibly want to do that? Well, the answer is relatively clear. So this is a piece of tape that Lando uses, and I believe this is from Monaco, but there's plenty of other similar pictures we'll see in a second. Lando and Lewis, I think, are the only drivers to do this. But they like to use a piece of tape to show them where they need to put into their grid position, because we know that the visibility in those cars is so low down, I can't see anything. It's difficult to know whether your wheels are perfectly positioned. They do have those yellow lines on the track that extend out from the grid box, so most drivers will use them to line up. They'll just have a reference point on their car that they will then line up with that. And, you know, it's a little bit subjective maybe, but that's what most drivers do. However, some drivers, let's say Lewis and certainly Lando, they like to use tape so they can line something up with the tape when they come to the grid, and then they're perfectly positioned, ready to go with no margin for error at all. And, you know, who knows, even an extra 10, 15 centimetres, that could be critical when it comes to gaining the right racing room at turn 1 in certain instances. But Sky Sports News understands that Red Bull staff member who was fined for this was trying to remove the tape that was stuck on the grid wall by McLaren, designed to achieve an optimal position on the grid box, as we know. So there's plenty of pictures of this. They were trying to remove this piece of tape, which I find absolutely hilarious. This is another image of it, actually. I think this does look like Austin. So this is the piece of tape in question. Now, the funny thing about this is that according to other reports, McLaren have known that Red Bull have been trying to do this now for some rounds. This isn't a brand new thing, because you're not allowed to enter the track in these areas, obviously. That's against the rules. That's what they were fined for. But there's nothing that prohibits you messing around with a piece of tape that somebody else has stuck on. It may be considered incredibly unsportsmanlike, because it makes, you know, when Lando comes around for the formation lap, he's now no longer got a piece of tape there to line up with, and it'd be wondering where it's gone. And that could be problematic in multiple ways. But there's nothing against the rules there, right? It's just unsportsmanlike, or maybe it's part of the game, right? I don't know. What do you guys think about that in the comments below? I think it's all rather funny. But apparently McLaren have known that Red Bull have been trying to do this. So they've tried other tapes, like tapes that are more difficult to remove, or doing it in a certain way that the Red Bull team crew member won't be able to deal with it, right? So there's all sorts of ways, and I actually think that if this continues, there are loads of games that you can play with this. This is just another example of the particular tape in question. Now, just to quickly mention before we discuss those other scenarios, Hamilton does this, but he does it in a different way. So Lando actually likes the tape on the wall, right? Whereas Hamilton, as you can see here, he's lined up in his box. This is, you know, pre-race. and he's using a reference point on maybe the side of the track somewhere with this piece of tape that they're placing on his car, right? So it's just a tiny bit of tape that they're putting on his car. And you can do it both ways. But of course, you add a tiny bit of tape to the car. What's that going to cost you over a Grand Prix distance? A thousandth of a second over 60 laps? It's not going to be much. Maybe a thousandth of a second a lap might be a fair assessment. But the point is that Hamilton does it this way, which of course Red Bull wouldn't be able to tamper with because it's on his car, but Lando does it another way, which means that they can potentially get to it. So the race describes that they were told by multiple sources that there was no question that this was indeed the target. Red Bull has interfered with the tape at recent races too. McLaren is understood to have changed its methods in the US, which is like, this is just what F1 is all about, in my opinion, making it harder to remove. There's nothing wrong with McLaren using tape or a visual marker on the wall at the side of the track, as it's not governed by any regulation at all. This also means it's not protected by the rules, so whether it's in the spirit of competition, but it is certainly legal for Red Bull to just go and rip it off. So this is what it's all about, right? I know that many Red Bull fans are looking at this thinking, damn, Red Bull are back, that they're actually doing it like they used to. And I think while we're talking about this, there will be loads of theories on what Red Bull could think about next, or what McLaren could think about, right? Because, okay, let's say this is a bit of tape. You could try and rip it off, but that could be a challenge. There might be some residue left over. McLaren might be using a very sticky tape, or they might be putting like even more glue on it, so it's difficult to remove. Whatever, I don't know. The regulations don't cover it. If you're Red Bull, what are your options? If you can't remove it, could you add some additional tape? That would kind of be my theory, is okay, let's say you've got one slice of tape here. What if Red Bull come out with a whole roll of duct tape of the same type, and they put like 3 more strips or 4 more strips or something, so they take it from a small line into like a big rectangle. And then Lando comes in and he's now got a massive thing. So then there's all sorts of margin for error. That might be, I don't want to give Red Bull any ideas, but like that's one option, right? Instead of removing it, you just add to it to make it less relevant as a reference point. McLaren could also have their own approaches. Again, they could use something that's in a slightly different spot that Red Bull couldn't even be able to access. But also, Red Bull have been caught for this now, right? So are they going to take a €50,000 fine on the chin every weekend? That's what I'm trying to say, right? Like, are they really going to turn up to every Grand Prix and be like, well, we got fined 50 grand last time, but you never know, if it helps Max turn 1, then it's worth the risk. Out you go again, mate, or whatever. Probably not, but possibly, right? So I think the games here are certainly set to continue. As I say, Norris is actually in a pretty good position. He's 26 points ahead of Max. Obviously, Piastri's still absolutely in the combo. But if you take Piastri out for a second, Norris is 26 points ahead of Max. 5 races to go, 2 sprints. So it's, still definitely doable for Max's perspective. But if Lando can, keep delivering solid performances, qualify well, finish well, if Max doesn't win everything, I think Lando said it yesterday. He's like, look, I'm just going to do what I can do. And if Max just has the pace and he just beats us, then he beats us, Like, on some level, Norris accepts that if Max and Red Bull have just got the fastest car everywhere, then fair enough, he wins. Congratulations, right? Amazing comeback. But Lando, I think, is actually in a stronger position that he's been in for some time, especially because his race pace in Austin, given the... this is especially remarkable to me because Norris was stuck behind Leclerc for a long time. He was in dirty air for a long time, and his race pace was still notably faster than Piastri. The race did a video kind of describing why this might have been especially challenging this weekend for Oscar, but there's no secret that he's turned up to a stint of races where he struggled last year, and for the first time this season it feels like that's now happening again. Just one final thing to mention for you all on Carlos Sainz. You guys remember last weekend where Sainz was like, hang on a second, this TV direction is atrocious, we're not watching any racing, we're just watching the girlfriends in the pit box. Now this time out they changed it. I don't know if there was a single girlfriend on the screen the entire time. They clearly saw the feedback. It would be remarkable to imagine it was purely coincidence, the change of tune. Was it perfect? No, they still missed some things. but I think many would argue that it was probably better in terms of TV direction this weekend, so maybe they'll see feedback from both sides. I don't really know what putting the girlfriends on the screen, like what value that really adds a lot of the time, but of course there's always a debate to be had on these type of things in terms of, you know, how much is sport, how much is entertainment, and all the other elements in between as well. So very much interested to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.